Welcome back, Visions fans. Ready to play? Will here. Today we're reviewing Chunak, one of the new characters added to the permanent pool of characters, one of the main characters in this part 2 of War of the Vision storyline, so very excited to get to know his kit a little bit better, but without waiting any longer. Today, the normal stuff, it's the character overview, base and total stat analysis, some more of the metrics, all leading up to the report card, which then sets the stage for the class of job overview, where we look at the abilities a little more, the TMR review and general thoughts to kind of conclude everything, with finally some Esper recommendations and weapon optimization, just generally speaking. Now, the character overview, brand new water unit, the first we've had in quite some time. They've given him the Duelist, Nightblade, and Thief Subjob. I feel like every character has Nightblade nowadays. I feel like literally almost every other character I review has a Nightblade Subjob. Just saying. The weapon, though, it's a sword. You can equip hat, cloths, and accessories with a move of 3 and a jump of 2, so a little extra mobility there. He is a 90 cost unit, and we look at the resistances here. Really known for the pierce and missile resistance. 15% to pierce, 10% to missile. He's got 0 to both slash and strike. The slash one's a little bit concerning, but not the end of the world. And then minus 5% to magic. So there's a little bit of a niche where he does have his time and plays just based upon these innate resistances. Now, from a status element perspective, he is a 50 faith unit, not someone you want to have at a higher faith, so you don't have to worry too much about this. But Poison and Berserk are ones that are common enough. They're not really all that dangerous, though. I wouldn't worry too much about them. The 10% to disable certainly is nice, though. Now, let's look at the base stats overall. His base HP, a little bit lower than that average, but he is an evade unit in his purest form, so makes sense that he would skew a little bit lower on the HP like many of the other evade units, and he's right there with the others, so nothing too concerning there. From an attack perspective, he's definitely just a smidge down in terms of the tier list of overall base attack stat, but he does still have a relatively high stat, and there's a lot of good ways to build that up, and he does get to a decent enough spot for total attack at the end of the day, and a lot of penetrations as well to help with that. Now, from an agility perspective, this is where you see the first dip in things, which is kind of odd for an evade unit having such a low base agility. He does end up making up for it, as we'll see in a couple minutes here, but base agility, meaning what you'll get from the vision card boosts, definitely a little on the lower side compared to other units. From a dexterity perspective, does skew a little bit higher here, and that makes sense because the Duelist Subjob is known for more of how it plays into critical hits and whatnot, so you do start a little bit higher on the dexterity side of things, and then base luck also on the higher end of things as well, as an evade unit that's kind of a necessity. So nothing too surprising here. Only notable things are really just kind of that subpar agility, or base agility, at least. Now, when we reconcile the base stats here to the total stats. So base stat wise, this graph kind of sums up what we just saw here. The total stats, though, a couple changes end up taking place here. He does end up getting back to relative norm for what he has for agility, actually a fair bit amount above the average, and he actually comes back down to earth on the dexterity stat here. They kind of chip him on the board. So when we look at things all together here, you can see on the board stats they give him 12 agility. That's the highest that they give any character for board agility. So they kind of make up for that lower base agility, and from that perspective, dexterity is on the lower side here. A lot of characters tend to be in the 70-ish range. They only gave him 40. But overall, decent enough starting spot for most of these stats. Now we look at the crit hit and crit avoid. Surprisingly, because of the lower board dexterity, his total dexterity ends up being a smidge lower, which means his innate critical hit rate a little bit lower. But that's not the end of things. You know, most of his abilities, as we see, have a crit rate chance built into them, and because it's higher on the base side of things, and there's a passive for it, you'll see in a second, ends up getting better. But from a crit avoid rate, that higher luck stat also does skew him a little bit higher on crit avoidance, so he won't be chunked down by damage as quickly. Now, when we consider the passive you can equip, that gives him a boost to his crit hit rate. He does move relatively up the line here. Now, there's still a lot of characters that have a better innate crit hit rate, but that passive does give him a significant bump here. Now, we look at the accuracy overall. Higher luck stat typically correlates to a higher accuracy as well, and you can see he is on the higher spectrum of things. He does have a passive that can boost it even higher, but not necessarily ideal for the evade build, as we'll see in just a second here. But there are some flexible options here to how you can min-max his potential accuracy, but still he's above average, but it's not amazing. Now, from the actual evasion perspective, you can see he's kind of in this like middle range of the slope of where the evade units typically line up. And for anyone that kind of like groups this graph together, when I talk about like B tier evasion in some of these presentations, Chunak is that definition of like B tier evade unit, where this first box, that's kind of your Zazana Ketone, like absolute top tier. This next like 8 tiers where you get your more stereotypical evade units, so Locke, Violet, Elena, characters of that nature. And then this B tier is characters that, like Chunak, are really evasive, but they're not nearly as consistently evasive as some of the other units. They will suffer in high evade metas because people will be gearing for accuracy levels above what B is capable of escaping, but it is a valuable way for his survivability overall. Now we get to the report card finally. The effective HP here is actually a very interesting conversation to talk about when you talk about the actual stats. So effective HP, I'm going a C- here, just for the lower overall HP stat. Not a huge surprise there. The physical HP, a little bit better just because of those resist to pierce and missile, with the magic stat being definitely on the lower side, the D+ here. Now, some additional observations, it's kind of going to flip these grades on their head, if you will. No innate defense or spirit, or any ways to equip passives to increase that. He does have 10 AoE resistance innately, can potentially get another 15 and a buff, but it's not a great buff in terms of rotation. But his main buff that he uses, we'll see in a second, gives him another 25 evasion. It also gives him 20 unit resistance, and it gives him 30 defense and spirit until he receives 2 hits. Now, if you were to consider 30 defense and spirit as part of his effective HP, well, you can throw these grades right out the window. Having 20 unit resistance, 10 AoE resistance, 30 defense and spirit, this dude's like top of the charts for DPS in terms of survivability. So really hard to judge in the broad scheme of things just how much he can survive, because it's really just going to depend on the fight. On the primary stat, I'm going an A- here. Good innate attack stat, more about crit damage, and he does have to rely on his penetrations a lot because he is completely locked to slash damage, but I'm running some team mocks to them, and he can get anywhere in that 15 to 1600 attack. Overall, pretty good. From the agility perspective, I am going B+ here. Now, the Thief Lore passive agility boost does give him this bump to the B+. But you won't always have Thief Lore on personally, so this agility will take a little bit of a hit once you reduce that 12%. So the B+ might be just a smidge misleading when you don't have that equipped. Now, accuracy-wise, I'm also going B+ here. The accuracy is real good, could be great with the Nightblade passive, but that does conflict with the evasion, as we'll see in a second here. So the accuracy, kind of a range there as well, really depending upon your build and how much luck you're giving him as well. Now, evasion-wise, also going B+ here. Definitely an evade unit. The vision cards can be a little difficult to manage nowadays, but low base agility does hurt it a smidge. That being said, you can sacrifice some of the evasion for the bulk. As we've seen, he's already got some bulk on the buff here. Then if you decide to just do regular equipment and an Esper with some defense or spirit or resistances, you'll be just fine as well. So you don't have to max his evade just to still get some value. Now, from a movement perspective, I am going A here. Move 3, jump 2 all the time. The Thief Lore passive gives him another move +1. He does also have a buff that's move +1 should you decide to implement it in your rotation. So overall, for what he can potentially do, from a passives perspective, I'm going B+ here. Super versatile passive. That's the big thing here, is that you can min-max a bunch of different ways for a bunch of different builds. It is hard to get right, though. It does take some specific tuning in order to get the proper passives in their place. Now, counter ability is also going a B+ here. He does have a great counter ability for evasion, so that will help him. Overall kit, I'm going a B. It's just a little bit average. The Duelist is, in my opinion, one of the most interesting jobs. The sub-jobs do leave a little bit to be desired, though, in that there's nothing really terribly special about him. He does have some utility, and he's great for PvE for that purpose, but it's a little harder to make that job compete in what we're seeing nowadays for what jobs have and how many unique main jobs there are. So final grade, I'm actually going down to a B- here. He's good on paper, and you'll hear me hype him up here through the presentation, but it's just a very hard kit to get right between what you want to do for equips and vision cards and teams. And we're obviously in a tough meta too, where lightning is a prevalent threat, so water's kind of in a tough spot in general. Same can be said for evasion right now with Flagbearer, Glaciella, and how many guaranteed hits some of the ice teams have with Velus's limit break and Snow's basic hit and whatnot. So yeah, final grade, I think B- is a safe choice here. Now, we look at the passive abilities. Duelist Lore is one that I think really should almost always have on. That's the evasion rate of 12 and the defense penetration of 40. Big damage increase by having that active for him. The other one I really like here is the Fatal Blade Work, skipping ahead. That's the crit rate of 15 and the crit damage of 20. So that's a big part of his offensive output. Now, Nightblade Mastery is certainly a good one here with the attack of 30%, and that's where you get the accuracy buff of 25, but it's decreased evasion rate of 10. So this basically offsets whatever you have on for the Duelist Lore, so you can see kind of hurts him there once you start going for that accuracy build. Now, Thief Lore, not a bad one either. The move 1 and the agility 12%, really, a decision between that and Fatal Blade Work in most instances, in my opinion. The acquired AP, definitely good for PvE content, but that might be about it. Now look at the counter abilities. Mirage Feint's really the only one you're going to want to potentially lean into, but Quick Action does have a time and place also. So the Mirage Feint, preemptive ability, 30% chance to proc. It's only physical damage, though, of the chance to proc, but it decreases the accuracy of 25 for 3 turns. So again, one of those ways you can help his evasion is by, proccing this counter ability. That being said, Quick Action also not the worst one either. The increased agility of 40% will help his evasion for that 1 turn and obviously get the turn sooner. I like Mirage Feint best overall. Now from the main job, the buff perspective, Preservative Footwork is an absolutely insane buff here. Evasion rate 25, unit resistance 20, the defense and spirit of 30, but it's only until you get hit twice. Now my gut is that if you were to get dispelled here, you'd probably lose the evasion rate and the single target resistance, but I think you would retain the defense and spirit. So there's some glass half full perspective as to how powerful this buff can be. Ready to Engage is the other one that's pretty standard for Duelists. It's AoE resistance of 15. It also restores 10 AP upon a critical hit for 3 turns. I just know that this buff in particular can be hard to get right, and making sure that he only uses it once and not just kind of circling around teammates. Now we look at the offensive potential here for the main job. Razor's Edge here has that 35% chance increased crit chance. So yeah, although dexterity might be like just slightly above average there, that 35% certainly jacks him up a whole bunch. 121% modifier, ton of usages here. 14 AP is pretty good. Fatal Pirouette is a nice giant AoE here, and I'm going to bring up the heights and ranges here as well. Also another 35% chance. The decreased critical rate of 40 is kind of interesting in that, you know, when we talk about his crit avoidance and not being chunked down as quickly by critical hits if he gets hit, this is a half decent one to make sure that it doesn't happen. And 32 AP may be a little expensive, but not the end of the world. It's a pretty forgiving AoE as well. Now, Break Flurry here is a really, really great PvE ability, also for PvP, don't get me wrong. It breaks physical barriers, decreases defense by 30, also dispels Protect. It's a double hit as well. This is an absolutely awesome ability. And then Triple Reave is as well. That's a triple hit here. Same modifier, but increases his slash attack resistance penetration of 30% for 3 turns. Now, the big downside to a lot of these abilities, if you're looking, most of them are confined to the height of 1, so he does have some height limitations, but that's where the jump of 2 comes in really handy, is that as maps get, you know, a little more high and low with the topography, he can really move around to make sure that he can at least use these the majority of the time. Now we look at the sub-job here. I do like the Duelist Subjob, but time and place to make it work. Offensive Footwork is a really interesting one. That's the other move +1 buff. Also increases the crit rate of 25 for 3 turns. So if you are really trying to lean into that crit build and crit damage and whatnot, this is a great one to potentially work in, but this buff is very hard to get right considering how many other buffs he has, not even talking about the TMR potential yet. Now Displacer is another really good one in my opinion. This is the decrease accuracy 25 for 3 turns per target. You know, when you talk about B tier evade units, being able to reduce enemy accuracy really is a strong way to make sure that they will dodge a lot of hits. So this fits into the kit really well. Now the Nightblade Subjob, this one's not bad. Double resistance, you know, pierce and missile resistance. We're in this meta at the moment, so this does have some relative value. But again, kind of like some of the other buffs, this is one that you can run in circles if you don't do it properly. So not the best buff in the world. Other than that, I don't really know if there's a lot of things I like here. Stun Blade is really similar in terms of damage to his main ability. It just has the chance to inflict stun rather than the crit chance, so really kind of a trade-off. Maiming Slash is obviously good for some of these healing metas where you decrease healing power, but nothing terribly unique on the Nightblade Subjob in the current state of the game. And finally, the Thief Subjob. I actually do like this one a fair amount. Now, it's amazing for PvE content where you do have steal time. The sneak attack ability here is the highest modifier in his kit. I do think this actually is a pretty good one for PvP too. My biggest, you know, thing I want to tinker with is finding a way to use the Shadow Cast buff here, where you can increase your evasion rate by 42% for 3 turns. Well, that certainly changes the hit rate of things overall, but like we're saying, there's a bunch of buffs here, really too many to actually work into a practical rotation, which is why he ends up being rated pretty low. On paper, things look great. In practice, it's really hard. Now look at the limit break. This is a stellar limit break here. Decreases unit resistance by 38 for 3 turns. As you've seen, he does have a fair amount of unit attacks here, so he really benefits from this. It's also a triple hit attack. So, you know, again, PvE content too, when you talk about the kind of imperils and the kind of slash chains you can build up, this is excellent for that. Now, the Mastery ability, nothing too crazy here. 5% attack really is basically nothing. It's really the AoE resistance of 10. That's the important part of the Mastery ability here. A TMR review, this is a pretty good TMR for evade units. It's kind of similar to some of the others that we've seen. I think the Lock TMR comes to mind for many, but the Lock TMR is increased luck and agility. This one's increased attack and luck. Overall stats are interesting enough. 12 defense, 12 crit rate. I'm a little surprised there isn't an evade stat on this. I kind of thought there may have been, but overall the ability itself still has a nice time and place. We've seen these kinds of TMRs work wonders for a lot of evade units, and Chunak's no different. Now for my general thoughts overall. In theory, super interesting water unit, tons of Astrius and Slash synergy. You get the double triple hits, the defense break, the Dispel Protect, and the physical barrier break. A lot of movement versatility, but hard to pull off. Now, Preservative Footwork does give him great bulk for an evade unit, but overall evasion levels aren't always consistent. And again, as we've seen, depends on what you have for vision cards, for unit affinity. You know, if he's off on the side doing it himself, he gets no luck bonuses or agility bonuses. So the evasion overall can be relatively inconsistent, but that buff is a legitimate good buff. Now, you should prioritize crit damage where applicable. He's the kind of character, and Water does have a vision card that is crit damage up, so there's a lot of interesting things you could do from that perspective. Difficult to calculate sometimes, though, which is one of the harder things about this character, that unless you're, you know, spreadsheet like me and constantly doing the math and the calcs of things, trying to get a feel for like crit hit and crit avoid and whether crit damage is better than, you know, pure attack stat, really hard to calculate for the average player. So for that reason, it's, you know, you have to kind of take it down a peg. Now, great PvE unit, as I keep mentioning here. You know, unit resistance down, steal time, the defense break, all the chains, the slash chains, fits in perfectly with what they do. He's a top tier, you know, Gilderate unit, potentially. Now, the current timing of the game makes him a difficult pick due to the lightning strength and what's available for anti-evasion. And I really mean that from like Flagbearer, Glaciella. Even the Dark Element has some guaranteed hit and some decent accuracy. So, you know, it's not really a good spot for evasion at the moment. But depends on the lightning comp too. You know, there's some lightning teams like Cloud and Fred which are hyper accurate, and you get other ones that are like Esther, Ibarra, and they're not as accurate. So really kind of a toss-up for what you end up seeing in that matchup. And finally, you can go for less of a min-max for evasion and just go for bulk and offense. I think that's totally fine here. You know, Astrius has a great buff here to increase slash resistance to teammates. When we talk about Flagbearer Glaciella as a meta with that hard pierce attack, you know, you can certainly throw Leviathan on, which you're going to see in a second here, really jack up that pierce resistance, and just give up on the evasion altogether with the intent of just like being able to kill her. Now, as we get into the Esper Synergies, Chaos Odin, by far the de facto #1. Not only does it have the evasion, but the Human Killer, 2 different trees of slash attack, missile and magic resistance, literally any pick of your choice for whatever you want to build him for. And some of the other good ones are the de facto evasion Espers, Glacial for the luck up, Demon Shinra and Tetrasulfate for the 25 evasion. Demon Shimra is kind of on the lower side of things just because it's the MR unit, so the stats innately on the luck and whatnot aren't as great. But it does have slash attack up as well, so that does have some good synergy with him. He's really not going to get much of Tetrasulfate though, other than some resistances. Now, some other alternative ones that I do think are interesting. Kraken is an interesting one. You know, water attack. There's some crit damage on there. Odin obviously is one of the best Espers for any DPS no matter what at all times. That's really just going for more a general slash type attacker. And Leviathan, as I mentioned, is an interesting one too, where there's water attack up, some pierce resistance. So depends on what kind of meta you're going to use him in, where obviously you want to lean into how good his innate resistances are already. Now, weapon optimization really is the Wave Blade. I do have a couple other notable mentions in a second, but the Wave Blade here is such a good weapon. I'm really going for the Assault build almost every single time here. 153 attack, 15 crit rate. Now, this is kind of interesting in that it gives elemental attack of 15. That does stack with all the other kinds of like slash attack here, so it is a net modifier of 30. That's obviously a big boost to his damage output. The acquired AP of 30% certainly is too, where we're talking about TMR as well. You don't have to rely on as many AP generating TMRs when you have some good AP management innately. So this is a great weapon for that. And then the reaction block rate of 30% just keeps him current with kind of the balance of the current state of the game. Now, the honorable mentions, that's really how I defined it. Brotherhood +6, it's basically a worse version of this sword, but certainly still usable. The Mythgraven Blade, kind of the same idea if you're going for the AP management, but definitely not nearly as good offensively. And then the Rapier is an interesting one that doesn't get talked about, where you have that crit potential, where it does give that initial crit boost for the first 3 turns, but that's literally for like high big brain IQ crit builds. Overall, consistent-wise, Waveblade is 10 times better than that. So go with the Waveblade in as many instances as you can. But that's the Chunak review in a nutshell. Super interesting character. I'm obviously going to have a lot of fun playing around with the kit, seeing what I can do for buff priority. It's nice that Water gets another evade unit other than just Lara Croft and Farm, where those two have obviously struggled for various reasons. I think Chunak probably struggles for many of the same reasons, but it's at least nice that he has a different kind of synergy, given what's unique to him overall. But thanks for watching, guys. I'll talk to y'all soon.